something that is planned today, Mark created a presentation really just comparing the outcomes of carbon strategies to other industry standards, including constant product, concentrated liquidity, and just your HODL options. So, Mark, thank you for doing all of that. Thanks for joining me.
You hear me okay?
I can hear you okay. Yes.
Good. That's good.
And we have you ready to share your screen as well. So whenever you're ready.
Yeah, 1 second. See how this goes. Uh, okay, what can you see right now?
I can see community call with Tuesday,
Perfect.
Monday. Cool.
Good. Okay. So yeah, as Jen said, so you know, this presentation sort of took shape over the last 6 hours or so. And I had originally wanted to do something that was a lot more ambitious, which was to compare carbon to a whole bunch of other different liquidity protocols. And I think that given the time constraints, that just wasn't reasonable. But I don't think that means we necessarily need to end the discussion here. I'm just going to present today basically the constant product versus asymmetric liquidity situation that we have on carbon. And then I want to follow this up maybe with the DAO discussion or a future community call where we can have a much more sort of in-depth look at how asymmetric liquidity compares with conventional concentrated liquidity. And I'm also hoping that I can sort of open source the simulator that I used in order to generate these results and maybe have a discussion with other community members about ways that we can improve its accuracy or even find an optimizer that makes carbon even more performant. So like I said, we want to compare it with the constant product liquidity situation, and it's important to realize that whenever you're comparing strategies, you always need to compare it against something that is, serving as the numeraire, right? The thing to which the success of a strategy can actually be compared. Because just because a strategy makes money doesn't necessarily mean that strategy was any good. Because it could be that doing nothing at all was actually going to be more profitable. And we've got three different characters here that are going to be representing the, these de facto strategies. And, after the cryptography conventions. And I'm going to give each one of them 100 TKN and 1000 USDC to play with. So they all start with exactly the same amount of stuff. And they're all going to be contributing all of those tokens to each one of their strategies. For the sake of this demonstration, I think that it's important, especially because one of them is going to be using a constant product approach, that the TKN and USDC values in total are the same. So if we assume that TKN is worth $10, then each one of these characters has a total of $2,000 in value, and it's exactly split down the middle. 50% into USD and 50% into their preferred risk asset. Alice is the character who's going to be setting up the carbon on strategy. Remember that the current price of TKN is $10. And so, if you put yourself in Alice's shoes, if she is going to, try to execute a strategy that actually nets her a profit in the immediate future, then maybe buying TKN, between $9 and $8.5 as it moves to the downside, right, which is only a $1.05 move, and then selling it again as it moves to the upside between $11.5 and $13 doesn't seem like such a bad idea. And I'm not necessarily saying she's doing this with her whole portfolio, right? We're just using this as a test case. And so the $2,000 that she has split evenly between USDC and TKN is what she's going to be contributing to carbon with this strategy. And so it's important to remember that on carbon we represent a strategy as two independent bonding curves, and you may see me start to use this. This pictorial representation of a carbon strategy in the future, and so I wanted to introduce it to you right now. Bob, he's going to be the one that uses constant product. And of course, we all know the familiar pictorial representation, that beautiful hyperbolic conical section. And again, because he's got an equal value of USDC and TKN, he can contribute all of that value to the curve all at once. And then Charlie is going to be essentially our control group, and he is going to do nothing, right? So he is going to just keep his tokens in his wallet. I wasn't sure what to put here, so I just put a picture of an empty battery. But he's essentially just keeping those tokens where they are. He's not interacting with any DeFi protocols, but that doesn't mean that he is necessarily not executing a strategy. I think we often forget that doing nothing is an active choice, right? To keep your tokens in your wallet and just let them sit there still means that you're exposed to the volatility and the value of those things. And so sometimes that is actually a preferential strategy compared to doing anything else, and it's legitimate. So I don't want anyone to think that that Charlie's just necessarily a control group, but he is a very helpful yardstick to which we can compare the effectiveness of Alice's and Bob's particular strategies. So for Alice, remember, she is going to be essentially buying low and selling high. And you may hear me start to talk about things like fading strategies or scaling in and out, which is when we're using a range. And you don't have to think about it in terms of bonding curves. You can actually draw these buy and sell zones directly onto a chart. So, for example, if one of these charts represents a buy, then this could become the green zone on the bottom, whereas the price of that TKN starts to move down. Then Alice is compelled to buy more of that because she thinks that it's going to appreciate in value over time, and so she is motivated to acquire it at this discounted price. And then as it starts to appreciate in value, this is the red zone. And this is where she's going to be exchanging that TKN back for USDC because she can now sell it at a premium. And so realizing those gains is just sort of a healthy way that traders manage their risk over time. And again, I'm not saying she's doing this with her whole portfolio, but she's doing it with a section of it, and she's hoping to net a profit with it. So these boxes is essentially what we're going to be leaving on the chart as we watch this simulated sort of this simulated price evolve over time. And so for the first little part, you can see this orange line is tracing out. I didn't use Fibonacci candles. I'm just using a linear chart. But you can see how it as it moved up into this red zone. It's actually in Alice's sell zone here. And so that liquidity essentially becomes active, right? There are people in the market that would be interested in taking Alice at that price, especially because even though it just touched it, it was in there for a decent length of time, right? I haven't given any units to this time axis, but this could be, days or hours. It doesn't really matter, right? 25 to 75 hours is a pretty decent length of time, and so I expect that there would have been a lot of market participation against Alice's order. And so because of that, she actually sold a little bit of her TKN at that point. And I don't want to get into the details of it on this call because the whole purpose of this presentation is to sort of roll back from some of the complexity of the last presentation, where you can still visit that on YouTube, where I actually looked at exactly how these bonding curves respond and how they rotate liquidity between each other. But in this case, just know that when she's selling a little bit of TKN there, that means her USDC balance is actually going up. So she has the ability to buy more TKN should it capitulate down into her buy zone. And of course, because this is the point of the presentation, we can see that there was a deep capitulation and there was a sort of a bottoming pattern forming with a very sharp spike into the bottom at around 100 time units. And that is where Alice is effectively buying the dip automatically. And she didn't have to respond to this, right? This isn't something that she had to set an alert for or wait at her computer to see this happen, because it's already a part of her strategy. Essentially, that liquidity that she had provided in USDC to buy TKN at that price is just executed for her, right? The protocol is going to just respect the decisions that she's already made. And then as the price moves further up, that new TKN that she bought at the low price, she can sell a little bit more there. And then just to finish off the simulation, I sort of let the price go a little crazy and sort of move outside of Alice's sell zone. So at the end of this point, she would have essentially converted all of that TKN that she started with back into USDC, because it is a concentrated, liquidity position, which means that as soon as the price moves to the other side of your range, you do end up entirely in the asset that you were hoping to exchange for. But what makes Carbon special is that when that's happened previously, back between 25 and 75 on the timescale, that USDC that she was exchanging was then immediately available and supported an effective liquidity floor for the token that she was hoping to purchase. And this means that overall her strategy has been much more profitable compared to what it would have been with a normal concentrated position. But again, this is something that we're going to be exploring in future presentations. So just see that, just recall that she set up these two zones, one to buy, one to sell, and then she just walked away and sort of let it evolve over time. And now she's effectively, finished that strategy because she's all back in one token. Maybe she could let the strategy keep going if she thinks that a top pattern is forming and that it's going to capitulate back down and she's happy to buy it again at $9. That's fine. But you can also imagine that this might be a position where she wants to reevaluate and decide whether or not she wants to adjust that strategy or do something else with her portfolio. So this is a good time to now compare how these three characters fared against each other under the conditions of this simulation. And actually, at the end of this presentation, I can show you a little bit about how I coded it and what some of that data looks like. And then I'm going to open source that. I'll make sure that we distribute that to you somehow, just so you can see how these numbers were generated. But for Charlie, it's relatively easy because he didn't do anything with his portfolio at all. And so if we started with $1,000 worth of PKN at $10 and then it appreciated to $13, then he's now got $1,300 worth of TKN, and his $1,000 of USDC obviously didn't change in price. So his portfolio overall, he still benefited, right? He hasn't made a loss. In a way, his HODL position has been actually quite effective. And so he's managed to net himself a $300 profit, assuming that he decides to exit from that TKN position at this point in time, which he may or may not do. For Bob, he actually ended up with slightly less, right? So he still did well, right? So this standard constant product strategy that he is committed to, it still earned him a profit, right? It's just not as much of a profit as it would have been had he done nothing at all. And this, of course, is the familiar impermanent loss paradigm, and it's really been the thing that AMMs have sort of struggled with over the last 2 years. And if you are comparing the productivity of your protocol against doing nothing at all, then you can understand how frustrating it is to have gone to this extra effort only to end up worse off than had you just sat on your hands. And so, so Bob's strategy, even in this case, where I've tried to give it quite a decent amount of transaction volume, right? I haven't skewed this and or tried to bias it in any way. I actually thought that there was a good chance that the regular AMM position would actually come out ahead of HODL, but I didn't have time to sort of adjust the settings of my simulation and see exactly where the rubber hits the road there. So Bob has made $290 overall on his strategy, but it's still a $10 loss compared to HODL. Whereas Alice, using the asymmetric liquidity strategy, has actually benefited even more than had she HODLed by quite a lot. So she's managed to turn her $2,000 into $2,732, again, starting with exactly the same conditions that Bob and Charlie did, but with the difference being that she used an asymmetric approach, whereas both Bob and Charlie are actually using a type of symmetric approach. Well, certainly Bob is, you could call HODL a type of symmetry. And so that difference there is not small, right? She more than doubled the returns that Charlie saw on HODL. And so I do think that this is a pretty good demonstration that there is something, this idea of asymmetric liquidity, it has financial legs. And, the people that, it's interesting because the people that already know this, they get very excited by carbon when we describe it to them. I think that it's the rest of DeFi, and this is something that I think as a community we need to we need to sort of foster a culture for. I think the rest of DeFi is very much interested in this idea of sort of lazy yield, and I think that with demonstrations like this one, where you can put in just a minimum effort and just like take a position on the market and stick to your guns, or and like I said before, like not with your whole portfolio, but at least with a section of it, you can actually see significant returns, even with relatively little skill, right? These kinds of calls are things that I see people do all the time, and in general, because markets tend to move up over time anyway, being able to take advantage of these volatile moves while building your portfolio over time is something that I think all of the really advanced, sophisticated traders in the world would be happy to endorse. And so I think that what I might do is show you what some of this data looks like. Jen, what can you guys see right now?
I can see where it's current timestamp, current market price,
Perfect.
$10.
Yeah, so this is really just like spaghetti code at the moment. I'm gonna see if I can get someone to to clean it up, and maybe we can make it a bit more presentable. But essentially, what I've got here is this is the random price data that I'm using, and then this is the price chart that it's created. And essentially, for every step in time, so this has 200 total steps. What we're looking at is what would the transaction be in order to make the marginal price on on either one of these liquidity positions match the market price. So it's essentially a type of, we're making the assumption that we've got an infinitely deep liquidity source somewhere else, something like hyper efficient markets and instantaneous arbitrage, if you want to think about it that way. And so as we tick through the clock, I've got a bunch of functions in here that are essentially having a look at what the market price should be, and then executing a trade so as to bring that marginal price to where it's supposed to be. On carbon, this is actually relatively straightforward, but on things like constant product, because we need to take into account fees, and this is something that I should have said earlier on, right? We're not just doing the ignore fees thing because this isn't fair. They've actually used the standard 0.3% fee that Uniswap v2 tends to use, and every time that there's a sort of a tick over, you can see that it's calculating, calculating an arbitrage. It's measuring the marginal prices, and then it's seeing what sort of trade is necessary in order to move the price on that pool to that stage. So here's a good example where we can see the market price of TKN is now 10.2. And so it's identified an opportunity here, and so it's swapping 8.447 USDC for 0.8351 TKN. And then at the end of that, you can see that the market price is in agreement with the marginal price on that particular position, but not in both directions, right? And this is the trick to doing a simulation well, is that you have to realize that because of the spread that you effectively get from the fee, that you can only sort of marry one of those marginal prices with the market. You can't get both of them. And so what I've done in this case is to sort of be generous and to sort of have like a less than efficient arbitrage, where the arbitrager might have made slightly greater profits by not trading as much as they did. But this also means that the pool gets more volume, and that means that I think it's I'm basically trying to give the constant product version of this strategy the best possible fighting chance at beating the asymmetric one. And so you can see here, right, that it goes through thousands of iterations, doing this over and over and over again. A good example for carbon when it finds one. Let me see. There should be some up here. Yeah, so here's an example for carbon, where it's having a look at the market price again, and then it's measuring the marginal price and the reciprocal marginal price on the liquidity position, and then it's calculating how much of a swap is required in order to bring the pool up to that point. So I think for a lot of people, they might be sort of rolling their eyes a little bit at the obviousness of this thing, but I'm aware that not everyone in our community necessarily understands how this is done. And so I just kind of wanted to bring that to light. And so I've managed to do this, like I said, for concentrated liquidity and asymmetric liquidity without too much hassle. And I'm in the process of building a module that's going to support things like Uniswap v3 positions, which I think is going to be really interesting for comparing, how not necessarily how strategies work against each other and which one is better, but if there is a sort of synergy where some users to try and hedge their bets might deploy strategies on both protocols, for example. So my ambition is not just to show you how I performed the simulation that led to this presentation, but also to make this sort of a bit more general, and so that you can upload any sort of price chart that you want and fit ranges to it and have a look at, to effectively backtest a type of strategy and sort of learn how carbon can be used for these types of activities. So I think I've probably spoken for long enough. If there's any questions, I'm very happy to take them.
Mark, in the meantime, I just want to touch on something. When you were saying that the strategy was over, it doesn't necessarily have to be, because if somebody who wants to continue with this strategy, they don't have to cancel or just kind of let this one die and become somewhat of a disposable strategy, right? Instead, they can just adjust those parameters. So if they see that chart moving up, they can adjust their buy and sell zones that they kind of want to focus on to continue trading this and not just be left in that USDC or that TKN that the strategy ends often.
Yeah, of course. I didn't mean to imply that that's even necessarily the best thing that you can do. All I meant was that for the purpose of the simulation, it makes a nice sort of stopping point. Because now, the IL is starting to get out of control for Bob, who's in a standard constant product position, and Alice is essentially traded all of her tokens out, and so letting the simulation run further up won't really give us any more insight into how these different strategies compare against each other. But you're right, from a product perspective, if Alice was happy with how this performed, it's totally reasonable that she could just keep letting it run, right? These buy and sell zones that I've set up were only I think 15% apart or 20% apart, and in crypto that's nothing. So these channel trading strategies, if they are moving horizontally, it could run perpetually if that's what you wanted to do. But you're also right that I think, after letting something run for 200 days or something, it would probably make sense to at least come back and reevaluate whether or not the assumptions that you had when you set up that strategy in the beginning are still relevant. And rather than having to withdraw liquidity from the protocol and recontribute it, which is something that you would have to do on a conventional concentrated liquidity protocol. On Carbon, you can actually just update the parameters of your strategy. So you don't have to, you don't have to pay all of that gas for withdrawing tokens and sending them around and re-interacting with the system at a different place. All of the parameters that govern how your tokens are bought and sold are a part of your strategy. And so if you want to, for example, say you want to move your buy and sell zones up because the market is trending that direction, that's literally just a single read write transaction. It should be very, very inexpensive.
Yeah, I understand exactly why you did it the way that you did for the presentation. It was a beautiful presentation, by the way. It was super easy to follow. It was really, really clear. So thank you for doing that. I think it was just more of a side note that it doesn't necessarily have to end there for anybody, creating a strategy on carbon.
Of course.
Does anybody have any questions? If you do, let me take a look, Mark, really fast in our channel here. I don't believe we have any questions. So that was standard constant product. And then you'll prepare another one for us with concentrated liquidity, and then kind of how, a trader can use UniV3 or concentrated liquidity and carbon as complementary platforms.
Yeah, complementary platforms, and also having a look at which type of market conditions might favor one over the other. Um, it just the Unity 3 stuff is slightly more difficult because I need to make sure that these comparisons that I do are fair, and Uniswap has a lot of interesting mechanics behind it, such as like the fee accumulation outside of the pool, and I also need to find a way to sort of account for the increased volume that it gets, or I at least need some way to address that. So yeah, it's coming. I will do it. I am doing it. I'm just not. I'm just not confident enough in the results that I have yet to present those. But the constant product and our asymmetric liquidity versions, I'm perfectly confident in those results.
And you did this using the carbon simulator, right? And we have all the links available for that. There are 3 different links that you would recommend
Yeah,
users would
actually
visit.
no. I
Okay.
actually I did all of this from scratch today.
Oh,
Um, but I will be I will be using this as kind of let's say an inspiration, sort of a proof of concept for a module that I think should become a part of the carbon simulator.
okay. All right. I understand. Thank you. Um, I don't think we have any questions. It might just kind of be nice to give an update. I know that development, everything is well underway. Is there anything that you can speak to in regards to the actual, like the progress of carbon at the moment?
Yep, it looks like it's right around the corner. I'm not sure. There's some things that I should check before I speak about them publicly, just in case I put anyone on the spot. But I think we should have some news, by the time we speak again. Is there a DAO discussion next week?
Next week, yes.
Yeah, so I think we should have something that we can talk about that would be, yeah, that would speak to that question in a very profound way by next week.
Awesome. Very cool. Thank you. And just for anybody on the call, also, a couple of the other contributors and I will be hanging out on Fridays for an hour. I'm going to make an event here on the calendar and Discord. So if there are any questions that are kind of following up any of the content that's put out or any of the calls that we have, if you just want to get up there and just ask those personally versus typing them out in our channels or sending us DMs, whatever it happens to be, we're going to make ourselves available. We're just going to be speaking to carbon and maybe even like how the deficit. I know that some of the pools, especially recently, we've seen an improvement there. So if you would like to join us, I'm extending the invite. Like I said, I'll put a calendar or an event here in the calendar for that as well. So we're going to start that this Friday. Otherwise, the DAO discussion that Mark is referring to will be put up on the calendar shortly as well in the form of an event here in Discord. So keep an eye out for those, and I'll put out announcements for them as well in the channel. So I think with that, we can probably call it a day. Mark, thank you so much again for preparing that. I really
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it. It was definitely like beneficial to see it in terms of an actual chart, you know. And thank you to
Yeah.
everybody who joined the call. If you guys do have any questions, please just let us know.
Yeah, and as usual, if anyone wants anything, like I said that I would be cleaning some of this stuff up, but if you're happy to to have a look at completely uncommented, super inefficient Python code, I'm very happy to share it with you. Or if you want the PowerPoint slides or whatever, just ask Jen and I'll make sure that she gets them to you. But other than that, I think that everything is going up on YouTube anyway. So if you wanted to go back and revisit some of those concepts, then you won't have to wait too long.
Yeah, definitely. Anybody reach out to me, and as soon as the call is up on YouTube, I'll put out an announcement for that as well. So cool, Mark. Thank you so much again, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll be able to speak again on Friday.
Thank you so much, Jen.